we would like to invite Dr. Amran Muhammad, Managing Director, Islamic and Strategic Studies Institute, ISSI, to deliver his welcome speech.
Professor Dr. Imran Bo, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Industry and Community Partnership, UKM, National University of Malaysia. Professor Dr. Muazzah Muhammad Awal, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Student and Alumni Affairs, National University of Malaysia, UKM. Dr. Hanif bin Omar, Deputy Director General, Research Division, Prime Minister Department. My friend, Associate Professor Dr. Zarina Osman, Dato', and ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you all to this evening program that we designed actually we had a big program for this entire week. Actually, this program is the last program for our the first Kuala Lumpur International Kalam Symposium, which started on the 22nd, and today's last day. The whole idea of this program is to bring back Islamic intellectual and spiritual tradition into the fore. Yeah? If you see now, there's a lot of problems in the Muslim world which affect also the entire world. And in our case now, very obvious to us is a problem of violence, terrorism, which is always associated with Islam. And we feel the problem is very much related to the problem of knowledge among the Muslims. So that's why DC, I would like also to introduce you DC, yeah? Our institute, Islamic and Strategic Studies Institute. We are formed in 2010 by a group of intellectual and professionals who think that we need to revive our Islamic intellectual and spiritual tradition to connect with the modern world and to face the challenge of the postmodernism, the modernism. Yeah. So our work is basically very serious academic intellectual work. Our production, for example, we just published we want to produce high quality physically and also intellectually book. Yeah? So in conjunction with our symposium, we published 2 books. One on Ibn Sina on demonstration, yeah? And one book is exploring religious pluralism, yeah? By our own scholar. So this is a kind of work that we want to advocate in the Muslim society. We see a lot of things that we inherit from the past, in our tradition, in our civilization, a treasure that our contemporary Muslims forget or didn't know. If they know their tradition and their knowledge, they will not associate or do things that we now usually relate to the Muslims. So this is part of the bigger agenda in our institute. And we're also very lucky to have our partner from UAE, Kalam Research and Media, which Professor Dr. Aref is the founder and chairman. He has been very generous in helping us to achieve our objective, and among others to start or to embark on this the first Kuala Lumpur International Kalam Symposium. So tonight dinner is a special dinner for him also, because he also not only academic but also even politics. Yeah, he's now apart from the Libyan ambassador to UAE, he's also an advisor to the National Security Council for Libyan government. Yeah? And I think when you talk about IS, post-Arab Spring, global solution, he's a cup of tea, yeah, in a sense. Yeah? So today I think we would like to invite him to share his thought with us. And I hope maybe we can also learn something. The most important thing, we don't want that thing to happen in Malaysia. This is our main concern. Yeah? Thing that happen now global, latest event happen in Belgium. Yeah? So we don't want that thing to happen in Malaysia. Our neighboring countries think that it happened already. So this is something I think that we should share with Professor Aref. Yeah? I think I have no need to introduce him, because many people know him, and also in the table you have his biodata, so you can read from them. So before I pass to him, I would like also to convey my appreciation to Associate Professor Dr. Zarina with his group. Yeah, he's come from the group of they call Research FRGS UKM 1/2014 /SS04 UKM. They have a code name here for the research. And I think our two vice chancellors and deputy president know what it meant. Yeah. So also the group, a lot of his students helping us tonight, yes, as a volunteers, apart from our own team. And so I again would like to thank you very much for everybody who have put their time and energy to make this dinner a reality. So without further ado, I would like to invite our High Excellency, Professor Dr. Alinaya, to present this.
Let me first of all begin by thanking all of you for being here, and for thanking you for this gracious and generous dinner, which has made me already ready for sleep. So I think the idea of a preemptive dinner is the best way to make a speaker fall asleep. So I will try to resist that. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the Libyan Embassy in Kuala Lumpur for having asked my esteemed colleague, Mr. Badda, to actually represent the embassy here and to be with us, and I am very grateful for their presence. Even though I must admit that I did my best to avoid them and not to inform them, in order for my visit to be purely academic. I did not want it to be politicized in any way, and I did not want to have to make courtesy visits to government offices and so on, in order to be with my students and my teachers. So as an academic, I actually avoided informing the embassy, but alhamdulillah, our embassy is quite vigilant and they have found me. And I am really grateful that you are here with us, and do please convey my best regards to His Excellency the Ambassador. And thank you very much, Councillor, for coming. I would like to thank especially the esteemed colleagues, the academics and the professors and the students for participating. And just sitting at the dinner table, I have been surrounded by esteemed academics in various specializations that are of absolute pertinence to the issue that we are facing today, this rise of what's called the Islamic State or ISIS. And these specialties range from international relations to semantic analysis and cognitive semantic analysis, to analysis of perceptions and social patterns of conduct. And also colleagues from the Prime Minister's Research Office who are very much aware and alarmed about what is happening to us. There are heinous crimes being committed every single day in the name of Islam that have nothing to do with Islam. And Belgium is a case in point. It gave me great sadness to, yesterday I sent my condolences to the Belgian government through their ambassador to the UAE. And we keep, it's amazing how many condolences letters I have written over the last year of sending to various countries condolences letters for people who are killed by people who are actually claiming our religion and who are claiming our language and who are stealing our very narrative, our foundational narratives. They're kind of stealing our identity to the point where not only non-Muslims have become quite alarmed about Islam as wrongly conceived, but also Muslims. The phenomenon of losing young Muslims totally is actually quite alarming, and it is increasing in the Arab world. And if one just does even a simple search on the social media, one can find now atheists in countries like Egypt and Libya and Tunisia and other places where it was inconceivable just 50 years ago. Atheism was something that we read about in other civilizations in other countries, but never in the Arab world. Now we're facing atheists and atheism, and it has to do with the revulsion that happens because of what we see. We must really reflect on this phenomenon, and we must be very open with ourselves and very frank with ourselves, and we must do a very deep review of who we are and what we say and what we do, and what we have been doing and saying for the past, I would say, 100 years. There is need for reflection, and there is need for a kind of muhasaba, as we say in Arabic, as in Abu Harith Muhasibi's perspective, muhasaba of a kind of doing an account of what we have been up to. And what are we doing wrong that we have young people in the name of our religion doing these things? And also, what are the factors giving rise to this, and how can we combat it? What I would like to share with you today is nothing like a kind of a systematic explanation, but more like ideas that may be explanatory to some extent. And because they may be explanatory, may begin to point to therapeutic approaches that we can utilize to mend what has been broken and to kind of cure the traumatic situation that we are in today. And here are a set of reflections. The first reflection, which has emerged in my mind because of certain images I happened to see on television of mass executions in Iraq when ISIS first entered some of the large cities, and where they executed hundreds upon hundreds of people in mass, and in mass graves they threw them. The image immediately brought back images that I had seen on documentaries covering World War II, and especially the Nazi atrocities of World War II. And I began to think that maybe this phenomenon that we are seeing has more to do with Nazi-like behavior and fascist-like behavior than anything to do with Islam. This is not to simply just look for a foreign source, but I think there is a lot of validity in comparing these phenomena and actually reflecting upon them. The period of the 1920s and 30s in Europe was a very interesting, fascinating period that was also a very troubled period. Late in the 19th century and in the early 20th century, before World War I, people were quite hopeful and forward-looking. The notion that humanity has progressed and has now become civilized, and that peace and prosperity will simply follow, was quite widespread. And then we get World War I, which was quite devastating, and then in the post-World War I period, a whole series of issues began to emerge. One of them is economic crisis, which is also very important to bear in mind. In Libya, for example, we are faced with thousands upon thousands of Tunisian ISIS fighters who happen to be quite unemployed and unemployable and not able to escape their situation. And I think unemployment and wretchedness does have something to do with the rise. So unemployment in Europe during the 1920s was actually quite rampant, especially in certain countries like Italy, like Spain, and like Germany. So definitely there is an economic base to the rise of such phenomena. But there were also some other things like what can be termed crisis of meaning, when the traditional frameworks and worldviews and kind of presuppositions that people used to understand their world and their environment began to collapse in Europe. Traditional Europe began to kind of lose its basic structures that gave people meaning and identity, where the community began to break down and individuality and individualism began to rise. People began to kind of lose the structured ways in which they used to have meaning in their lives. This crisis in meaning, I think, is of the utmost importance. Because as the psychologist Viktor Frankl, who was himself a victim in the Nazi camps, who happened to survive, he wrote several books on the meaning, the meaning of life, and especially the search for meaning, and the search for ultimate meaning. And I think those writings are extremely important. Frankl actually points out that the human being has some needs, some basic needs. And these basic needs not only include food and drink and a family life and so on, but they actually include meaning. that meaning is actually something that human beings long for and seek. And in all civilizations throughout history, societies provide their individuals and their members with meaningful frameworks that give the person a sense of who they are, where they're going, where they're coming from, what are their basic duties, what are their basic rights, what is worthy in life, what is not worthy, meaning a set of values. And this valuation system depends on narratives that are conveyed in this society, narratives that are told through sometimes stories, poetry, singing, through what a grandmother tells her grandchild, what a father tells his son, what a mother tells her daughter. These methods of conveying meaning are extremely important in societies. What happened in Europe in the 1920s and the early 30s was a kind of collapse of many of the traditional structures of meaning. And when people had this double crisis of economic crisis and what we can call meaning crisis, they became very vulnerable to what I call meaning peddlers. These are people who give you cheap meaning. Just as in, there is great food like the sake that we just ate and the wonderful meal we just ate, there is also cheap food that is peddled rather cheaply. It sometimes makes you very sick because it's not exactly very clean. And it's maybe cheap, but maybe not very nutritious. McDonald's comes to mind, even though I don't want to be sued. So, some people say that McDonald's comes to mind. Okay, so, and this is not an official Libyan position on McDonald's. So, these peddlers of meaning are actually quite clever, because what they do is they say, you have a crisis, you have a problem, I have a solution for you. Just as a drug dealer tempts a young person and says, you have a depression, you have a problem, I have a solution for you. Just take this tablet, it will make you happy. There are also meaning peddlers, and these are ideologues who actually give a quick fix to young people, to actually give them an almost instantaneous sense of who they are, what they are, where they're going, where they're coming from, what normally is associated with a set of values and meanings. And one of the earliest meaning peddlers in Europe was Benito Mussolini, the founder of fascism in Italy, who was actually, interestingly, more foundational than Hitler in many ways. He actually wrote early on, and he actually managed to convince some intellectuals like Giovanni Gentili, for example, to actually elaborate theoretical basis for fascism. The rise of fascism had to do with sense of loss of economic power, powerlessness, loss of meaning, and also lack of political power. The will to power, as Friedrich Nietzsche actually pointed out, is something that is quite fascinating, interesting, but also extremely dangerous. And what Mussolini triggered in people was a sense that by becoming fascists, they tap into the great power structures of ancient Rome. And by becoming fascists, they become part of an economic revival of Italy. And by becoming fascists, they know exactly the meaning of life. They know where they're going, and they have a leader, a duce, who will lead them. Okay? Adolf Hitler followed the same pattern. In his book, Mein Kampf, basically, you get the same offering, except in his case, he also offers a diet of hatred towards others, which is also a very important part of fascism. So Hitler did that, and General Franco did that as well in Spain. Why am I raising these old skeletons from European history? It's because I believe that what we're seeing in the Arab world today, in Syria, Iraq, and now, unfortunately, in my own country, Libya, in Mali, and in various other places of the Middle East and Africa, is basically the rise of a new form of fascism, pure and simple. And it is a unique form of fascism in that it is Islamized fascism. You know, many people have worked on the Islamization of knowledge. I think there has also been an Islamization of fascism. And the Islamization of fascism works very simply like this. You basically identify the key words, okay, of fascism, and you give them respectable equivalents from the Muslim tradition. So the Reich of Hitler or the Nazione of Mussolini becomes the Ummah. The forza of Mussolini and the notion of power in Franco and Hitler becomes the notion of al-quwwa, wa-tamkeen, you know? So you really basically have a kind of a transliteration of fascist notions that become Islamized by borrowing words that are very potent. The problem when this happens is that these words actually become stolen, kind of. It's like someone saying, can I borrow your car? And then just driving away with it. And can I borrow your house? And just kicking you out of it. These guys are actually kind of snatching our very language. Because what they call ad-dawla al-Islamiyya has nothing to do with dawla al-Islamiyya. It is neither a dawla nor Islamiyya. But now you say Islamic State, and it becomes very awkward. So if Pakistan now wants to say we are an Islamic State, it's kind of difficult, you know? Malaysia has a constitution that it's an Islamic state. It's a state where Islam is the official religion. And it becomes kind of awkward. And you can almost become kind of apologetic about it because these guys have basically mutilated the language. And now, you know, Wahda Islamiyya, for example, Islamic unity. Also, they steal the word wahda, you know? And all of a sudden, when you want to talk about unity between Muslims, you get nervous because, you know, these guys are also talking about it. They're basically stealing language. That's what it is. It's semantic theft, to put it, okay? And this semantic theft is actually very, very dangerous because with the stealing of language, you get the stealing of concepts. And with the stealing of concepts, you get the stealing of worldviews and frameworks and presuppositions and the mutilation of these. So when you're fighting these guys, it becomes very difficult because it's like fighting yourself. I don't know if you've seen any of those movies. I happen to go to movies, you know, even though I teach Islamic studies. Okay? But there was a movie where Batman had a kind of a false Batman, okay, that was fighting him. Okay? This is what happens. You begin to fight a mutilated form of who you are. You're a Muslim, but you're fighting these guys who are using Islamic terms. So and then there is this hesitation, even from some Azhar scholars. You know, they begin to say, should we do takfir of these guys? Maybe not, maybe they are. Is it dalala? Is it khawarij? Is it this? We're trying to classify. I think we should just call them fascists, because that's what they are. Okay? And the reason I'm calling them this with confidence is I've actually gone through the analytics of analyzing the language and analyzing how the fascists do things. And interestingly, I found that some of these movements, in their little kind of the ancestry of some of their ideas, actually did borrow from fascism historically. There were essays in the 1920s that glorified Mussolini, written by Arabs. And there were essays written by Arabs that glorified Hitler at a particular period. We're almost forgotten about these, but they're very important to reconsider. Why? Because I believe that fascist terms got into the Arabic language and Arabic ideologies, especially Arab nationalism, under the Ba'ath and under the Qawmiyun al-Arab, whereby Arab nationalist fascism actually kind of prepared the ground already for the rise of ISIS. And that is why it is not a coincidence that ISIS rises where Ba'ath was. And ISIS now rises in Libya, where Gaddafi basically practiced a form of fascism. I know that in this country some people still like him. Most foreigners who are far away don't have the same sense that we had of what he did to us. But anyway, so there was a form of fascism in Libya, and I can assure you, complete with its cultural revolution and its oppression and the tyranny and everything. So I believe that Arab nationalist fascism kind of prepared the ground and the categories for the advent of an Islamized version, which is now a lot more attractive and lucrative because it actually cleverly uses the very language and symbols that motivate a Muslim norm. No Muslim would not be motivated by the notion of a Muslim unity. No Muslim would not be motivated by the notion of Muslims basically having a dignified life. No Muslim, and that's what they play on. They actually take these positive words and they do what they do with them. Now, interestingly, there was a time after World War II when many philosophers and psychologists tried to analyze fascism. And these books are almost forgotten also. They're not taught in philosophy departments, for example. And they are seen as works of kind of a little bit outdated. Works like the works of Hannah Arendt, that not only reflected on totalitarianism in a very important book with that title, but also reflected on violence and reflected on revolution. And I drove a great benefit and got great benefit out of the reflection she had on revolution. For example, the notion of professional revolutionaries, which she developed. In Libya, we've had this. As soon as the revolution, which was a popular uprising, that was massively popular, massively spontaneous, kind of the revolution got hijacked by professional revolutionaries who actually utilized this atmosphere of near chaos to actually entrench themselves in the very core of the state, into the banking system and into the security apparatus and into various areas, whereby when we finished celebrating the revolution, looked around, we found all the key places already controlled by ideologues, okay, who happen to be fascists also. So I am saying that these writings of people like Arendt are actually quite illuminating when it comes to the analysis of the phenomenon that we're dealing with. Another philosopher that I found very useful is Erich Fromm, who wrote about escape from freedom. And interestingly, he actually points out that people, when they lose structures that give them meaning, to use Viktor Frankl's term, actually escape from freedom. And he enumerates ways in which people escape from freedom. One of them is authoritarianism, is to actually try and find someone that will tell you that everything's okay. A kind of a fatherly figure that tells you things are not as bad as you think, and here is the truth. And that makes them very open to be victimized by fascists who actually can offer that kind of authority. So when people are confused and feel weakened and ambiguous about things, authoritative figures can appear very reassuring. And people kind of escape from their freedom, which they gain through the uprising, by going to these authoritarian figures and hoping that they will restore order in their lives. Because there is a kind of human fear from chaos. We don't like chaos. We don't like lack of structure. And if something is messy, we try to organize it as much as possible. This is not true of teenagers, and if you are a mother having to deal with a teenager, you know that they actually create chaos. Okay? But most adults try to create order where there is chaos. We resist entropy, to put it in physics terms. We actually try to create order. So when people lose order, and somebody promises to give them an order, they go for it. You know? And the notion of a bay'ah to a father figure who can now have a clear vision of where to go is exactly the weakness these guys actually are using. And that's how you get people doing bay'ah to Baghdadi in Nigeria, you know? Weird when you think about it. Why would someone from a Nigerian village do bay'ah to Baghdadi, you know? And Libya, like, this is very strange. You know, people are not willing to do bay'ah to the king, you know? And yet they are willing to do bay'ah to Baghdadi, you know? Why? And even when they fight amongst themselves, it is not that they are fighting like one group fighting terrorism. It's actually terrorists fighting over who to do bay'ah to. So the phenomenon of Qaeda fighting Daesh is a very interesting phenomenon because they're fighting over the fatherly figure. Is it Dawari or is it Baghdadi? And they have a war. And people sometimes, they feel reassured. They say, oh, maybe, you know, this group is not so bad because, you see, they are fighting ISIS. Yeah, but what kind of fight are they conducting? They're fighting ISIS in the name of another ISIS. It is like taking comfort if you are living in Chicago in the 1920s that Al Capone from one mafia family is fighting another family and killing each other like in the Godfather movies, you know?